Okay, welcome everybody. This is the new series. I am starting with the 2015 Premiere Pro updates. Going to be going through a full tutorial. Be trying to release one of these episodes like maybe once or twice a week and get this whole thing out there. So those of you with the new software, the new updates, can use Premiere and use it efficiently and kind of learn it from the ground up. That's what this series is dedicated to, is learning Premiere from the ground up. If you're already experienced, then you might want to just go kind of visit some of the modules in this under my playlist. Otherwise, yes, this will take a while to go through and watch all these things because I'm getting to the nitty-gritty of everything. So welcome to the new Premiere Pro 2015 tutorials. First of all, I'm going to start up the new software here. It was just released like a week or two ago, depending on when you're watching this. If you're watching this in like 10 years from now, that will be totally a lie. But I'm starting Premiere Pro here. One thing that they bring up here first at the very beginning I want to talk about is the splash screen. Splash screen will start up whenever you start up Premiere, whether you're on a PC or Mac. I'm going to try to go through kind of the PC shortcuts versus the Mac shortcuts. I'll try to use those alternatives even though I'm working on a Mac. The shortcuts are very similar. Most shortcuts use Control on a PC rather than Command functions on a Mac. So anytime you hit like Control X, C, or V for cut, copy, paste, on a PC you're going to be hitting Command to X, C, and V on a Mac. So Control on a PC, Command on a Mac. Yeah, Macs are much better. They don't use that stupid Control key. They use something much cooler called the Command key. Much better. So much easier to hit than a Control key. Anyway, alright, so when we open this up, a couple things that you're going to be seeing here is you've got all these different tabs up at the top. These are kind of some new things that they've added here. This is very similar to their old settings here. I'm going to go through that, but first of all I want to show kind of these little new items here. If you're connected to the web and you're logged in to your Adobe account, it'll welcome you, of course, and it'll end up having updates on this as they come out with new features. And they come out with new updates. They'll have these little video clips you can watch and kind of new resources that are connected to Adobe Premiere Pro. So you can kind of click through these and kind of see the new features that are being added and ways to get started. They'll have some little tips and techniques that they keep updating. So these are like kind of little, almost like their own little web browser. They pop up with updatable items that Adobe can send to you. So with things with new features, how to get started with little tutorials and things like that. So kind of cool. You can peruse this, look through it, and see what there is. Anyway, I haven't gone through that too much, but anyway, we're going to go through getting a project started up here. So we're going to go through the features of getting your project set up. First of all, when you bring open the splash screen, if you don't see this at first, if it's on new features, make sure you click on Create. Create is where you're going to start your new project. These here have been carried over from their previous versions of Premiere. Since we've started using Creative Cloud and you have to subscribe, you can go inside of Premiere and you can set up a whole bunch of settings. You can set up workspaces and you can set up little preferences with keyboard shortcuts and things like that you customize for yourself. And then you can sync those settings from Premiere Pro so it will update on a server, and then you can load the software on a different computer like a PC or Mac, and then when you open it up, you can sync those settings to your new computer. So if you start using Premiere on somebody else's computer, you can sync your settings to that Premiere. It's kind of a cool little setup there. And if you're not logged into your Creative Cloud, you can use the settings from a different account and log in. This is pretty intuitive and pretty self-explanatory. On Open Recent here, this is going to show recent project files that you've opened up and you've used recently. You can just click on these and it will open up those specific projects. Or you can hit Open and it will open up it'll open up to a browser window either on PC or Mac, and you can navigate to a project file. Find that project file that you want to use, double click on it or select it and hit Open down here, and it will open up that project. So you can hit Open from here, you can find a recent project, or you can create a new project. They also have this convert from Premiere Clip, which I think is a basic version of Premiere. I've never used it, so I'm not sure, but you can convert it from a previous version. Maybe it's their answer to iMovie or something. I don't know. So you can do a new project here. Click New Project. It'll bring up this new window here. But before we go into this and create a new project, I want to talk a little bit about project files and the nature of most professional editing programs. Okay, within this folder here, I've got a couple things. I've got a bunch of media and some other things organized into folders. I've got some red footage and sound files. But I've got a couple Premiere project files right here. This one was a short film that was about like 3 minutes long, and with all the editing that went into it, I want you to look at this project file right here. This is not like a PowerPoint. PowerPoint, as you add photos to PowerPoint and as you add sound and movie files to PowerPoint, you save it and update it. The file size of the PowerPoint gets larger and larger because it's adding that media to the project file. Editors are different. This is just basically what's called an edit decision list, an advanced edit decision list that accesses or references the media. So here's all the media. I want you to notice this folder with all the media in it on this short film is about almost about 82 gigabytes here. So kind of a semi-big folder, not too big for a short film. But then notice the size on this project file. 3.6 megabytes. That's very small. That's a file that you can email to yourself. Basically, this is an edit decision list telling all this media, the red footage, the sound files, the effects and everything. It's telling it those things what to do and how to be edited. So this is just like raw footage, raw sound, and it's combining all this stuff together to create a project. But like I said, if you don't have the media, if you just take the project file, that is not your entire project. That's just a project file, and it's referencing the media. If you get rid of the media, then this project is basically dead. You'll open it up, and it will want to connect to footage that is not there. So you got to be very aware of that. Keep your footage in a place where you want to, where you're going to be able to access it and understand how it's organized. Be very, very conscious of how you organize your footage. And then once you start editing, you don't want to change folder names as well. If you started editing and you change a folder name, Premiere is going to have an issue and it's not going to find that footage and wonder where it's at. And don't ever rename files either, especially red files. Let me show you one thing here. This is one card that was transferred off of a red camera, and you'll see this one folder in here that contains all the shots. We air this open, and this has a folder containing each shot. And the shot, you'll see the footage, and it's like a little thumbnail thing in there. And so each one of these folders represents a shot. You don't want to rename these. You don't want to change the name. You don't want to change the name of them. You don't want to change the name of the folder. When you dump footage in off of any camera, you just dump the entire card into its own folder, and you import it into the project. And then if you want to rename all those clips, you're going to rename them in Premiere. We will get into that later. Okay, back to the splash screen. So we can start a new project here if we wish. Or another way of opening up a project is you can simply go to your browser and double click on a project, and it will open up your project in Premiere. If I just double click on this, it will open up this project in Premiere. Let's take a look. Project is open up. This is an older project. This is the project that I'd been working on here, a short film, and it's all here's the edit decision right down here. This is the edit that's been done, and it's referencing media. All these edit clips are referencing media that's already been shot and sound that's been mixed together with all this, and you see all the media assets over here organized into different folders. We're going to get into all that. So I'm going to close my project here. It'll bring open my splash screen again, and I'm going to click on a new project. Now, when you click on a new project, it's going to bring open some items down here. First of all, this here is where you name your project file. Under name, I'm just going to call this test project right now. Test project is what I'm going to call this. Now, you might want to, it really depends on how your workflow is. If you are working off of a server and you're saving the project file to your desktop, to your own computer, or if you have to save the project files to a server or an external hard drive or something like that, you can save that wherever you want to by clicking on this location down here. You hit Browse. So I'm going to go to my desktop right now. I'm going to click on Desktop, and I'm just going to create a new folder for my new project. I'm just going to call this Test Project. It's kind of a fake project, but I'm creating a folder on my desktop called Test Project. I'm going to choose this folder. Now you notice the location is my desktop and test project. It will save my test project file in this test project folder. When I hit OK, it will do that. A couple other things in here that to note are going to be, first of all, your renderer here. Very top one, depending on what sort of system you're working on, you'll have a few different options to choose. You can tell it to use the renderer. This is very rarely chosen, the software only option. This is for machines that have incompatible GPU or graphics, basically graphics cards, really nice graphics cards. Premiere will use the graphics cards to accelerate the effects within the software, and this happens really, really fast, especially with color correction. It accesses the GPU or your graphics card to do the effects. And with a Mac, you'll have CUDA options and OpenCL options. With this, I've got a CUDA card installed, which is CUDA compliant and works really, really well. So I'm going to choose this one. Oftentimes it depends on what you have installed. You might be able to, with a PC, I can't remember what the type it is, I think it's OpenCL, but you'll have basically a Mercury playback engine GPU option you'll want to select on a PC as well. If nothing shows up there and it wants to do software, you'll have to check online to see what you have to do. There are some options online to show you how to make your card compatible by changing a text document. I think that's still available. You'll have to Google that. Right now, this is available. Most cards, if they're NVIDIA cards and a couple other types, will be compatible with Premiere. So video next here. You're going to tell this what you want to display your timelines in. I'm going to do timecode. Timecode is the most common. If you are working on film to video transfer, you'll probably be using 35mm or 16mm to conform to the film standard and the same running time on the film. But I'm going to do timecode. You also have frames. You can have it display in frames as well. Timecode is probably the most common that is used. Down here, audio format, you have the option of displaying audio samples, which basically goes by frame rate or milliseconds. This is really if you're doing some nitpicky audio editing, and I'm not really going to get into that right now because I'm assuming that most people are using Premiere as a cutter, as a video editor, and not a sound mixing software. We'll show some basic sound mixing software, but if you're really getting into sound mixing, you're going to want to use milliseconds. But right now we're going to do audio samples, which will match the frame rate. 24, if you're doing 24 frames per second, or 30 or 60, it'll match those. So we're going to do audio samples. Capture format. This is ancient right here. Hardly anybody works on, I shouldn't say hardly anybody, but not many people work on DV or HDV anymore. If you're capturing from an HDV camera and your footage is high definition video on a mini DV tape, you will want to use HDV. If you're doing old standard definition video, you will want to do DV. So something like a DVX100 or DVX100A or B will be DV, and then maybe like a Canon XHA1 will be an HDV camera. So those old FireWire cameras, they have to plug in via FireWire to capture. Most cameras these days are solid state and you just transfer your footage off. So this is kind of largely irrelevant, just depending on unless you have those cameras you need to capture from. Scratch disks, next part here. Under scratch disks, this is going to determine where you are saving certain files here. First of all, if you capture video from FireWire, if you capture audio from FireWire, it's going to save it in the same folder by default that you are saving your project to. Same as project. Unless you're capturing video from FireWire, this is pretty outdated here. Video previews, when you build effects, which you won't have to do a lot unless you're compositing a ton. Your graphics processor will help take care of it, but it will save those. It'll rebuild the effects and build them into video clips and save them in the location that you choose. I usually leave this the same as my main project. It'll save it. If you're working from a project on your desktop and you're saving to a server, you might need to change these to your server, to the server that you're working off of or the hard drive that you're working off. This is very important down here. So same as audio effects as well. This is important down here. Project autosave. As you work, Premiere will continually save copies of your project. Depending on, we'll show you the preferences and show you how often it does and how many of those files it will do. But it will save that it will keep saving that project in case the software crashes. So we will show you how to set that up. If you download from the public library on Adobe's server, it will save those files to your hard drive, and this is where it's going to be saving them. And by default, it puts it in the same as the project here. And we'll get into the library as well and show you guys how to use that in a later episode. So with all that set up there, usually this can pretty much stay the same. Unless you're working on a server, you might want to change it. Then I'm going to hit OK, and it will enter the software. Okay, within the software here, if you go up to Premiere Pro CC or on a PC, you'll have to go under File, and you will find, unless you're on a PC, you will find the preference file on the PC under File, and you'll find it on a Mac under the Premiere Pro CC software pull down here. But you're going to click on this, and you're going to go under Preferences, and you're going to see several preferences in here. You can click on basically any of these, and it will bring up your Preference tab. If I click on one of these, it'll bring up the Preference tab, and all those items that were showing that list are also showing here in this little in this little screen that it brings up. First of all, I kind of want to talk about these things and what each one of these settings will do. You click on general. There's a few things that's kind of that's a bit intuitive. I'm not going to cover every single one of these, but kind of the more important items here. When you do video transitions, they're set at 30 frames automatically, or 1 second basically. So a dissolve, when you do a video transition, the default time is 30 frames. You can change this. You can set it up again if you want to. If you're going to be changing from 24 to 30 frames per second, if you want them to last 1 second, I would say do this by seconds. Set a 1 second, then it will change depending on if you go 24 frames or 30 frames or 60 frames or whatever you're doing. And the same on an audio transition as well. When you import photos, this is how long that photo will last. How long? If it's a still image, it's really just 1 frame, but it will make it into a video clip, and it will last however long you tell this to do by frames. You can also tell this to do seconds, and you can say every still image I want to bring in, I want it to last 5 seconds. Or if you're doing like a wedding video and you have a ton of photos, you can tell it to last 10 seconds before you do the photo import. If you import them and you realize they're not the right length, then you will have to change this and re-import the clips. Not a big deal. One other thing, you can go through these and checkmark these as you please. One thing that's really important in my opinion is this default scale to frame size. I pretty much leave this checkmarked every time I open up Premiere. I have my settings synced this way, and this won't be checkmarked by default, but I like it checkmarked. And the reason why is because if you're working in a 1920 by 1080 timeline and you start importing different resolutions of codecs and formats, you bring in like some 1920 by 1080 clips and some 4K clips and some 720 clips. If you have this check marked, as you bring in that footage, it will tell that footage to default scale to the frame size of your timeline. It's very convenient when you're editing. Otherwise, you'll have to rescale everything that you're putting into. If you have a 4K timeline, you're putting 1920 by 1080 clips in it, that will look smaller, and then you have to tell it to size it up, and it's an extra step you have to take. So I just pretty much always have this check marked. There's very few instances where you won't have this check marked. There are some folder setups in here as well, but those are kind of the main things to be aware of on the General tab. There are other items, you can kind of go through those and explore them if you wish, but those are the more important things. Under Appearance, you have a brightness item here. You can make your screen brighter if you don't like it so dark, and you can also change highlight colors down here as well. So if you just want that back to normal, hit default. I like this kind of darker color here because if you're editing in a dark room, it's nice to see kind of the image and not have the distracting brightness of the software surrounding you. So audio, there's some things you can do for audio if you're doing 5.1. I'm not going to go through it. We'll go through some of this specifically as we get into sound and whatnot. But audio hardware is kind of important if you're setting up a studio. If you're setting up a studio and you have some hardware like some sort of like a Motu device or some other sort of audio device that you got plugged in, Logitech device, and you want to send out to speakers, you're going to have to choose default outputs in here and tell it what sample rate to do the audio out to, and how to encode that audio to set up your hardware. Autosave. This is pretty important here. I usually change this here. When I go down to autosave, I will tell this to autosave every 15 minutes of work. For me is a lot of work. After I get 15 minutes, if this crashes at 14 minutes and it didn't autosave that 14 minutes of work, it makes me incredibly angry. So I'm going to change this. I like it about every 3 minutes. And then you can say maximum project versions with how large hard drives are. I just say 99. You can actually back up those projects to the Creative Cloud as well. So if your hard drive fails, they'll be backed up. They will be backed up onto the cloud as well. So kind of a cool little setting there. Capture and device control deal. If you deal with cameras that are using a FireWire, I'm not really going to go through that right now, and you have some other basic defaults here. But media, this is kind of important here as well. Now, if you these little things right here, media cache files is automatically saved in a location on your hard drive. If you're moving from computer to computer, you might want to browse and change these items to the server location of that project, of that specific project. So it saves those media cache files like audio, waveforms, and things like that. It will save into these locations. You could browse on each one of these and change those to your server if you wish, or a hard drive. If you're working on one single computer, you can pretty much leave this alone. If you're working on moving from computer to computer, I would recommend changing these to the server location or the common hard drives that's being used. Playback is pretty important here. You can set your pre-roll when you hit the playback shortcut. It'll go back 3 seconds after you do an edit. Some people like this about 5 seconds. 3 seconds is good enough for me to see how an edit works. Down here you've got a couple other items. I've got 2 monitors plugged in right now. If you want to play your video back full screen to your secondary monitor, if you have one plugged in, your secondary monitor will show up here. You can check mark, hit OK, and it will show, your video will show full screen to your secondary monitor, which is really convenient. Just make sure you don't do it on the same monitor that you've got the software on. Make sure that you're using your secondary monitor. Very convenient to watch full screen video. And that's all I'm going to show in there. Those are the basic settings of the Preference tab. Another thing I kind of want to reference, if you're coming from an older software or you want to customize some shortcuts, you can go into the Premiere Pro settings. Once again, on a PC, this is under the File tab, and you hit Keyboard Shortcuts, and it will bring up a bunch of different shortcuts right here. It'll bring up all the default shortcuts that are programmed into Premiere. It'll show the keyboard shortcut over here and the function on the side. There are a ton of these. I'll go through some of the main ones as we start going through the software. But if you are coming from a previous version of a software from Premiere Pro 6, or if you're coming from an Avid or coming from Final Cut 7, you can tell it to use Final Cut 7 shortcuts, or you can tell it to use Avid Media Composer shortcuts. I'd recommend, if you're permanently going to Premiere, I would say just memorize the Premiere ones and get used to those. That's what I've done. I used to use Avid, and I used to use Final Cut 7, and now I use Premiere, and I have just gotten used to the new shortcuts. But in here, you'll also be able to customize a few shortcuts, which I'll show you some examples of in episodes to come. Last thing I want to cover on this episode is if you go under File, Project Settings, hit General, you'll see those 2 tabs that popped up under the Project Settings, which are General and Scratch Disks. We already saw these scratch disks on the initial setup here, and you can change those locations if you want to. If you didn't get to change any of those, you can do it under the project settings. So if you didn't get to set any of those up initially on the initial project setup, you can go under File, Project Settings, and there they are. And we've already described these as a general for video rendering and playback, and your scratch disks. And then it's kind of an overall getting your project set up and kind of knowing where everything is to get moving on your project in this first episode.